Hey guys! Today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. How well do you really know the people you interact with in your daily life? Could you recognize someone who might be dangerous? That ability could mean not just your well-being, but even your survival. It's important to remember that appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes danger comes from the most pleasant, well-mannered, and seemingly trustworthy person. But every so often, someone's outer appearance fully reflects the nature of their inner world, the very soul behind the mask. The story of the brutal crime involving well-known producer Pamela Vitale shook the entire country. From the very beginning, this case seemed strange and tangled, and her husband immediately became the main suspect. At the time, no one could have guessed where the investigation would lead, or who the real person behind the horrific act would turn out to be. Pamela Ariana Vitale, later Horowitz after her second marriage, was born on January 11, 1953 in the small town of North Richland Hills, Texas. She was the younger of two siblings in a modest family with Italian roots. Not long after Pamela's birth, her parents moved with their children to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where she spent most of her childhood and teenage years. Pamela grew up alongside her older sister Tamra, to whom she was always very close. Both girls did well in school, had creative personalities, and showed a natural talent for learning foreign languages. Pamela had always dreamed of traveling the world, which led her to pursue a career as a flight attendant. She started out on domestic routes, but before long she was regularly flying overseas, mainly to European countries. During one of her layovers in London, she met a man named Mario Alford. Their relationship quickly turned romantic. In time, Pamela decided to leave her aviation career behind and relocate to London to be with him. They got married not long after and bought a cozy home in the suburbs. Over the next few years, they had two children together, a daughter named Marisa and a son, Mario Jr., named after his father. But even with a growing family, things at home began to fall apart. The relationship became strained, marked by frequent arguments and fading affection. By the early 1980s, the couple decided to separate. Pamela returned to the United States with her son and daughter. Now a single mother, she couldn't continue her job in aviation and had to find a new path forward. Pamela chose to start fresh in sunny California, believing it offered more opportunities for a new career and a better life. Her children, too, were happy to leave behind the damp climate of England. In California, she explored different jobs. She worked in a trendy clothing boutique, became a real estate agent, and even joined a modeling agency as a recruiter. Still, she often felt out of place, like she hadn't yet found her true calling. Then, in 1992, Pamela enrolled at the prestigious film school at the University of California, where she studied every aspect of production and filmmaking. She graduated successfully and began working as a producer, a career that truly resonated with her. Pamela threw herself into her new profession with passion. She advanced quickly, earned a good living, and gained recognition within film industry circles. In 1993, Pamela met a successful attorney named Daniel Aaron Horowitz. He represented high-profile clients, including well-known talk show host Michael Savage, and was frequently featured in the media as a legal commentator on some of the country's most talked-about criminal cases. Over the years, he had consistently ranked among the top 100 trial lawyers in the United States, according to National Trial Lawyers. In addition, he authored numerous articles focused on criminal law, trial practice, and legal procedures. Horowitz was originally from New York and earned his Bachelor of Arts degree from Hampshire College. In the early 1980s, he completed his Juris Doctor at Southwestern Law School in Los Angeles and became a member of the California State Bar. He had been involved as a legal expert in several high-profile cases, including the proceedings involving Michael Jackson and the widely publicized case surrounding the tragic loss of Sandra Renee Cantu. In the early 90s, Daniel wrote a screenplay based on one of the criminal cases he had worked on. He believed the story had strong cinematic potential and began pitching it for adaptation. That's how he crossed paths with Pamela, who at the time was working as an independent producer in Hollywood. She liked what he had created and promised to help him develop and promote the idea. They exchanged contact information and soon began collaborating. Daniel was 2 years younger than Pamela, and like her, had gone through a previous marriage that ended in divorce. They quickly bonded over shared experiences and interests. What began as a professional partnership soon evolved into a close friendship, and eventually a romantic relationship. In 1994, a year after they met, the couple made their relationship official and got married. Together, Pamela and Daniel were the picture of a successful and dynamic couple. Both had strong careers, impressive resumes, and were known for their intellect and creativity. They earned well and lived comfortably, able to enjoy the finer things in life. Their children from previous marriages were already adults by then, educated, independent, and living on their own. The relationship between Daniel and Pamela was strong. They were deeply in love and had big dreams for their future. Unfortunately, one part of that dream, having children together, remained unfulfilled. By the time they married, Pamela was already in her 40s. After several efforts, she became pregnant, but sadly, the joy was short-lived. She suffered a miscarriage. A second pregnancy also ended in heartbreak, and the couple eventually stopped trying. In the early 2000s, the couple bought a plot of land in an upscale suburb just outside San Francisco. They began building what they hoped would be their forever home. The project was designed by a well-known architect, and they poured their energy and resources into every detail, determined to create the perfect space. This was meant to be their sanctuary, a dream come true. But tragically, those dreams would never be realized. By the fall of 2005, construction of the Horowitz family's dream home was in full swing. In the meantime, Pamela and Daniel were living in a trailer parked on their property, closely overseeing every stage of the building process themselves. They had already met a few neighbors, though the development was new and sparsely populated, with many homes still under construction and some lots not yet sold. On October 15, 2005, around 6 p.m., Daniel returned home after a lengthy business meeting. Pamela's car was parked on the lot, which suggested she had already gotten back from work. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Daniel pulled in next to her vehicle, grabbed a grocery bag from the trunk, and walked toward the trailer. As he reached the door, something strange caught his eye. A dark red streak trickling from beneath the door, forming a disturbing puddle at the threshold. The trailer wasn't locked, but inside an eerie silence hung in the air. Daniel called out to Pamela several times, but there was no response. The moment he stepped inside, he was struck by a horrifying scene. Pamela was lying curled up on the floor near the wall, surrounded by a large pool of blood. The interior was in complete disarray. Items were scattered, furniture overturned, and blood was everywhere. Daniel rushed to her side, hoping to help, but the moment he touched her, he realized it was too late. Her body was cold, and signs of rigidity had already set in. There was nothing more he could do. His hands shaking, he grabbed his phone and called emergency services to report what had happened. When first responders arrived, they could only confirm Pamela's passing. The trailer was declared a crime scene. It was immediately clear that there had been a struggle. Pamela had put up a fierce fight to survive. She had suffered severe physical trauma, including broken ribs, a fractured collarbone and nose, and several missing teeth. As she fought back, she had managed to knock over a heavy television onto her attacker. Blood-stained handprints were found on both sides of the TV, indicating her desperate efforts. Under her fingernails, investigators discovered traces of skin, evidence that she had scratched her attacker in the process. Nearby, they found a bloodied ski mask on the floor, which Pamela had apparently managed to pull off the intruder during the confrontation. The medical examiner later determined that Pamela had been struck multiple times in the head with a blunt object, with such force that it caused fractures in her skull. On top of that, she had sustained a deep abdominal wound inflicted with a large kitchen knife. The injury was fatal, resulting in rapid and extensive blood loss. Crime scene investigators scoured the trailer for evidence. No unknown fingerprints were found, only those belonging to Pamela and Daniel, leading authorities to believe the perpetrator had worn gloves. During the struggle, the assailant had sustained injuries as well, leaving behind traces of blood on Pamela's clothing and in her hair. At the time of the attack, Pamela had been wearing only pajama shorts and a bra, suggesting she likely wouldn't have opened the door to someone unfamiliar dressed that way. At the time of the attack, Pamela was working at her computer, as evidenced by multiple open documents and project files. It appeared the events unfolded suddenly. She opened the door, was immediately assaulted, and a struggle ensued. She was subjected to extreme aggression, suffered a deep abdominal wound running from the lower torso upward, and was left on the floor as she bled out. The estimated time of death was between noon and 2 p.m. Investigators found foreign DNA in the trailer, but there was nothing yet to compare it to. One chilling detail stood out. The perpetrator, according to forensic experts, had stayed at the scene for some time after the attack and even used the shower, likely attempting to wash off blood. Evidence in the bathroom supported this theory. In addition, a glass with juice was found with visible lip prints and DNA that matched the unidentified blood. Another unusual clue was the complete absence of theft. Despite the disarray, nothing had been taken from the trailer. Valuables and even cash remained in plain sight, untouched. Disturbingly, the perpetrator had taken the time to carve a strange symbol onto Pamela's shoulder blade, something that resembled a signature or personal mark. On the trailer floor, investigators discovered several clear shoe prints. The tread pattern was distinct enough to identify the exact model of sneakers worn by the person responsible. Despite all this physical evidence, investigators still had no clear direction for the case. Immediately after Pamela's body was discovered, her husband Daniel became the primary and only suspect. There had been no sign of forced entry, suggesting that the victim had willingly let the person in. The lack of missing items also ruled out robbery as a motive. Moreover, the medical examiner confirmed that there had been no signs of intimate aggression, and no forensic evidence supported that kind of intent, making it unlikely that the motive was personal gratification. However, the level of brutality, especially the inflicted abdominal wound, pointed to a highly personal reason behind the attack. This kind of violence is often associated with revenge or an intent to cause prolonged suffering. But Pamela, according to friends, family, colleagues, and neighbors, didn't have enemies. She was known for resolving disagreements peacefully and avoiding conflict. Detectives focused first on whether the Horowitz marriage was truly as harmonious as people described, or whether there had been hidden issues that could have sparked such a crime. Yet, no evidence was found implicating Daniel. On the day of the tragedy, Daniel's schedule was airtight. He had arrived at his office around 8 a.m. and hadn't left until evening. He was seen throughout the day, consulting with clients, participating in a media interview for a high-profile case, and his whereabouts were confirmed by multiple witnesses. Dozens of people could vouch for his alibi. Still, despite the solid alibi, detectives weren't ready to fully clear him. One theory was that he could have hired someone to carry out the act, but this lead also came up empty. No financial records, communication logs, or personal connections supported that angle, and the case began to stall. The brutal crime that took the life of a well-known Hollywood producer sparked widespread public attention. News about the case was broadcast repeatedly across multiple television networks, and law enforcement offered a reward for any information that could help solve it. The investigation was under pressure to move quickly, especially as residents of the quiet suburb where the incident occurred were growing increasingly frightened. Local police worked to contain the situation and prevent community panic. On October 20th, 2005, 5 days after the violent death of Pamela Vitale, news broke on television that a new lead suspect had been arrested. The individual in question was a 17-year-old local named Scott Edgar Dileski. He had previously come under police scrutiny for fraud, petty theft, and financial scams. His known activities included stealing credit card information and using it for purchases or transferring money to his own accounts. In the months leading up to the crime, Scott had been living with his mother in the same neighborhood as Pamela and her husband Daniel. Although known to be a bit eccentric, most neighbors described him as harmless, just a quirky teen. However, what set off alarms was the fact that Scott had used Pamela's credit card to order specialized grow lights, equipment typically used for indoor plant cultivation. The order had been delivered to Pamela's address on the day of the tragedy, October 15th, but the equipment was missing from the crime scene. When police executed a search warrant at the Dileski residence, they found identical grow lights in Scott's bedroom. Although he had disposed of the original packaging, which meant there was no definitive proof that these were the same lights ordered with Pamela's card, there were other signs of concern. Officers noticed fresh cuts, scratches, and marks on Scott's hands and arms, indicating he had recently been in a physical altercation. This was enough to justify his detention pending further investigation into his potential involvement in the crime, which had been carried out with extreme aggression. Scott Edgar Daleski was born on October 30th, 1988, in San Francisco, California. He was the only child of Esther and Kenneth Daleski. When Scott was still in grade school, his parents separated. The divorce was turbulent and emotionally charged, leaving a noticeable impact on the young boy's mental health. Shortly afterward, his father relocated to another state and ceased all involvement in Scott's life, never reaching out or participating in his upbringing again. Esther never remarried and raised Scott as a single mother. As he entered adolescence, Scott began showing signs of being a troubled teen. He frequently acted out, displayed confrontational behavior, and was often in trouble for minor offenses. By the age of 14, he had aligned himself with the goth subculture that was popular among teens at the time. He grew his hair long and dyed it black, wore dark eyeliner, black lipstick, painted nails, and dressed in all black clothing, including long coats and hooded cloaks. Despite his striking appearance, many classmates described Scott as friendly, outgoing, and fun to be around. He wasn't viewed as dangerous, just different. About a year before the events of this case, Scott Daleski's mother, Esther, faced serious financial trouble. She lost her job, and the two of them were forced to leave their home. Some relatives offered to let them stay temporarily in their under-construction house in a new residential area in the suburbs of San Francisco, the very same neighborhood where Daniel and Pamela Horowitz were living. The main level of that house was nearly finished, so the owners moved in upstairs and allowed Esther and her son to live in the trailer on the property. Scott and his friend, Robin Crowan, were looking for ways to make quick money and began committing a series of petty offenses that brought them into contact with local law enforcement more than once. Later, Scott came up with a plan to start growing marijuana in his bedroom with the goal of selling it later. To make this happen, they needed specialized lighting equipment, which they ordered online using stolen credit card information. Interestingly, although Scott and Pamela were neighbors, they had never interacted directly. Daniel Horowitz, however, had offered legal advice to Esther free of charge at the request of mutual acquaintances, helping her with documents and other legal matters due to her difficult financial situation. Scott had a disturbing fascination. He was deeply interested in infamous serial criminals from around the world. He read obsessively about their backgrounds, the details of their actions, and the patterns that made their cases so notorious. He frequently discussed these topics with classmates and friends, and even spoke admiringly of those who were never caught, such as Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac. His behavior raised eyebrows. One time, he drew an occult symbol on the school grounds and performed what witnesses described as a ritualistic dance around it. By the age of 15, he had already begun drinking alcohol and experimenting with banned substances. Scott also wrote dark, unsettling poetry with strong undertones of self-harm and references to ending one's own life. His mother was aware of these writings, but she dismissed them, assuming it was just a dramatic phase and a way to get attention. His fascination with death didn't go unnoticed. He frequently made comments about how long a person could survive without certain organs, how much blood loss it would take to be fatal, or where to strike to ensure death. Most chillingly, he once casually remarked that he would be interested in watching someone's final moments. When investigators looked into Scott's internet search history, they were shocked by what they found. Alongside information on infamous serial cases and occult practices, he had been researching autopsies and body dissection. His browsing history included videos of surgical procedures and footage involving animal butchering and dismemberment. From the start, there were multiple signs pointing to Scott's involvement in the violent crime that took Pamela Vitale's life. He had no alibi for the day in question, and investigators noticed unusual cuts and scratches on his hands and arms. In his bedroom, they found clothing stained with dark spots resembling blood. Underneath the trailer, hidden inside a bag, police discovered a pair of sneakers, matching the exact sole pattern found at the scene of the crime. By the mid-2000s, DNA testing was already a common tool in investigations, though the process still took more time than it does today. Nonetheless, there was little doubt about the outcome, and soon the results confirmed what many already suspected. Samples collected from under Pamela's fingernails included epithelial tissue and blood that matched Scott's DNA. His blood was also discovered in the trailer's shower, suggesting he had attempted to clean himself after the attack. Scott's mother, Esther, was also arrested on suspicion of aiding in evidence concealment. Investigators learned that a day before her son's arrest, she had thrown away a backpack at his request. The bag was recovered quickly. Esther later explained that she never looked inside and assumed it contained banned substances or possibly documents tied to the financial fraud Scott had been involved in. But what they found was far more serious. Inside the backpack were crucial pieces of evidence: the weapon used in the crime, as well as a blood-stained hoodie, jeans, and gloves. Scott's best friend, Robin Crowan, agreed to testify against him in exchange for full immunity. He admitted to their plan to grow marijuana indoors and confirmed that they had used stolen card information to buy the necessary lighting equipment. However, Robin shifted full responsibility for what happened next onto Scott. According to Robin, Scott had gone to the trailer alone to retrieve the package, believing it had been dropped off at Pamela's doorstep. He claimed that he had no idea what happened next until he saw the news coverage about Pamela's tragic death. After the incident, Scott went to a nearby town to visit his girlfriend, Jenna, who was supposed to help provide him with an alibi. But once Jenna was arrested and questioned as a potential accomplice, she began cooperating with authorities. She gave a precise timeline of when Scott arrived at her place and noted that he had a noticeable injury on his arm and blood on his clothes. Scott denied any involvement in the crime, but admitted to going to the Horowitz property to retrieve the package, hoping it had been left outside. He claimed the idea to grow plants indoors had been Robin's, and that Robin had sent him to pick up the delivery as part of a setup. It was later discovered that Pamela hadn't actually let her attacker inside. She had likely forgotten to lock the trailer door, and the perpetrator entered without resistance. What happened next can only be reconstructed from the evidence, as the suspect continued to deny guilt. It appears that Pamela got up from her computer to confront the intruder, and a violent struggle followed. During that altercation, Scott is believed to have physically assaulted her and inflicted a fatal wound to her abdomen. However, he also sustained an injury from the knife, and Pamela managed to scratch him in the process. The high schooler stood by and watched as the woman lay bleeding, slowly slipping away. Once it was over, he calmly went into her bathroom and used her shower to rinse off the blood. He changed into the clean clothes he had brought with him and stuffed the bloodied garments into a backpack. But there was one detail he hadn't accounted for: a cut on his hand that continued to bleed. That's why the clothes found in his home carried only his own blood, while the ones recovered from the backpack had traces linked directly to the victim. When Scott appeared in court, he looked like an entirely different person. His hair was cut short, back to its natural color, and his dark Gothic style was gone. He looked like any ordinary teen, but despite the change in appearance, he continued to deny his involvement in the crime. He insisted he was being framed and remained calm and composed, showing no signs of remorse, empathy, or regret. Scott told the court a bizarre story. He claimed that on the day of the incident, he had been walking through a wooded area near their neighborhood. According to him, Pamela was there, acting erratically. He said she suddenly attacked him, scratching him, and that he struck her in the face, breaking her nose. That, he claimed, was how her blood ended up on his clothing and his blood on hers. His defense attorney argued that unidentified DNA had been found at the scene, DNA that didn't match anyone living in the trailer or Scott himself. The defense tried to use this to suggest that the real perpetrator was still out there and hadn't been identified. But the jury didn't buy it. There was simply too much evidence, too many witness statements, and too many physical clues tying Scott to the scene. In July 2006, he was found guilty of first-degree aggravated homicide and evidence tampering. Due to his age at the time, he avoided the death penalty. Instead, the court sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Following the conviction, Scott and his legal team filed multiple appeals, but each was denied. However, in 2016, California law changed. New legislation stated that individuals convicted as minors could not be sentenced to life without parole. This shift gave Scott an unexpected opportunity. A new ruling granted him the right to a parole hearing after serving 25 years. That means Scott Dileski could, in theory, be released in 2031. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, And you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.